Should India go up the escalatory ladder or not? What lies ahead? I am joined at this moment by someone who, as Gaurav said, was a 1971 war hero, former naval chief. Admiral Arun Prakash joins me. Appreciate you joining us, sir. Admiral Prakash, we are seeing in the last 24 hours growing escalation in this India-Pakistan conflict. Pakistan using drones, missiles to target Indian military establishments. India in return neutralizing Lahore's air defense system, radar systems. How do you see what's happened over the last 24 hours? Are we seeing an inevitable escalation in this conflict, Admiral Prakash?
Well, escalation was something that should have been factored in right from the very beginning by our military planners, and I'm sure it has been. So India has delivered a message, a long overdue message, that this nonsense of so-called cross-border terrorism has gone on long enough, and it's time for the Pakistani deep state, that is the ISI and Pak army, to step back and stop it. So the message has been delivered in the form of attacks, kinetic attacks on 9 different locations, supposed to be hideouts or training establishments of these terrorist organizations. So that message has been sent across. Now it is up to Pakistan to acknowledge it and say, all right, we've got your message and we'll do something about it. On the other hand, Pakistan could well say that, all right, you attacked our homeland and we are going to respond. I mean, that's a step that must have been taken into account by our military planners when they launched these 9 strikes into POK and Pakistan.
But does this escalation now worry you, given what's at stake? You've said in a recent article that the initial wave of these kinetic attacks may need to be followed up with more attacks, and the public should be prepared for attrition, loss of life, and the distinct possibility of escalation. Are you worried that this could now spiral out of control?
Well, it is entirely up to Pakistan, because India had suffered for long enough, for far too long, from these so-called cross-border terror attacks, which were actually acts of war on the part of Pakistan. They were raising, training, and launching these terrorists from their territory into our territory, which is actually an act of war. So we've tolerated it for many decades. But after Uri in 2016, we sent a message. Then another message was sent in 2019, the airstrike on Balakot, in the hope that the Pak military and the Pak ISI would realize that they had overstepped the limit. But apparently that message didn't go across. And for the last 5 or 6 years, they've continued with these activities. So this was yet another message, a much, much stronger message. And this time, it was not just meant to be punishment, but a message of deterrence, that you've gone so far, but no further. Now it is, as I said, it is entirely up to Pakistan to accept the message or to raise the level and come back at us. This is hostility, this is war. And once you start kinetic action, you have to be prepared for escalation. And escalation is also, it depends how many steps on the escalatory ladder you want to go. I mean, we've attacked them, they may respond. And then do you want to respond again? But I think India has very sensibly sent across a message that this is non-escalatory. We've not attacked any military targets. We've not attacked civil targets. We've only focused on the terror organization, and that's the message we want to send. So I think it's now time for the Pak deep state to sit down in a huddle and decide that, look, enough is enough, and let's put a stop to it.
Tough words from you, Admiral. Once you go on the path of kinetic action, you're effectively saying you're at war with each other. But the big question is, how do you step off the escalatory ladder? Is that going to become more and more difficult to step off this ladder as Pakistan provokes, Admiral Prakash?
Yes, it is. And I think we should be prepared for that. I mean, air defense, if you are using aircraft to launch attacks, then their air defenses are our adversary. So taking out their air defense is a precaution that we had to take. But escalation is inevitable, Rajdeep. I mean, the two sides, the politicians, the statesmen, I don't know if there are any statesmen on the Pakistani side, have to decide that how far are you going to go? When are you going to call the international community and say, all right, this has gone far enough, it's got to stop? Because at the end of the tunnel, you have to remember that both countries are nuclear armed. And if this escalation goes out of control, then the ultimate end could be a nuclear detonation. And Pakistan has been known to be making irresponsible statements. I think very recently their defense minister made some wild statements. So, I mean, that is unthinkable. A nuclear exchange is unthinkable. So it has to stop well short of that. And possibly some intervention, some talks, negotiations at some stage have to be undertaken.
You know, you mentioned the nuclear issue is unthinkable, but the concern will be it's one thing to establish conventional or re-establish conventional deterrence, Admiral, vis-a-vis Pakistan. The other worry is, how do you ensure that an irresponsible Pakistani army state leadership is deterred from using this last option of nuclear weapons? You know, there is that overwhelming concern of some kind of miscalculation. How do you stop this situation from escalating beyond a point and at the same time sending a tough message to Pakistan?
Well, for 26 years, our nuclear deterrent has been adequate to, and our nuclear policy has been adequate to deter Pakistan from any thought of using nuclear weapons. So deterrence has held fast for 26 years. And I'm quite sure that it will continue to do so, because for all the irrational, wild statements that they seem to make, I mean, self-preservation is a very powerful force. So if Pakistan starts anything, even at the tactical level, the response they will get, India has stated quite clearly in its doctrine that any use of nuclear weapons, whether tactical, strategic, whatever, will invite an overwhelming and a devastating response. So that is on the table, that any thought of using a nuclear weapon, no matter how small or big, where Pakistan will lose a city or a large chunk of its population. So their pretense of being irrational, I think, is a big act. No country wants to be, sort of and lose a huge chunk of its population. So I am fairly confident that we will not reach that stage. Now, how to get off ramps from this building up of tension on both sides, where to get off gracefully, is something that the statesmen, maybe, negotiations, third-party negotiations, something like that has to be done. We've sent a clear message, a kinetic message, that we don't want any more cross-border terrorism. The guilty party is Pakistan. It is up to them either to accept this message and say, all right, we'll think about it, or to escalate it and then decide how far they want to escalate, because if they escalate, they will get harder and harder knocks from the Indian side. That is inevitable.
One final question, Admiral Prakash. We've seen in the last couple of days, Pakistan use artillery fire to target innocent civilians. India has responded in kind, not just the armed forces. We've seen our air power striking Pakistani terror bases, Muridke, Bawalpur, other places. What about naval power? You're seen as one of India's most distinguished naval admirals. Is naval power also an option if Pakistan chooses to escalate beyond a point?
Well, yes, if it comes to that, I mean, if it's a graduated escalation, then the naval power can certainly, because naval power takes a little time to have effect, because it will affect the economy. Now, let's remember, when we think of Pakistan doing reckless things, that they're a much smaller country, smaller population, economy which is in deep, deep trouble. They're taking loans only to pay off other loans. They have ethnic problems, huge internal domestic problems. So they are not in a state to be overly aggressive. And if this whole thing, this hostility stretch out for a longer time, then pressure can be brought to bear on them from seawards also. Their economic, their energy, their trade, and food, etc. Much of it comes from abroad by sea. So the Indian Navy can swing into action. Even before that, the Indian Navy can also take kinetic action, special forces, they've got long-range missiles, etc. So it all depends on what our government and our military planners have got in store for them. There must be a planned, escalatory, calibrated step 1, step 2, step 3. So the Navy will have a role to play if it comes to that, but in a longer term.
Okay, Admiral Prakash, for speaking so plainly and clearly to us, a 1971 war hero. Appreciate you joining us. Very clear, Admiral Prakash, speaking with sort of clarity.